This is Lewis Hart for Boxing Social in association with Empire Fight Store, Forged Irish Stout and Ready to Fight. Delighted to be joined with Andy Clarke. We're here in Liverpool, the first big event of the year in the UK. Natasha Jonas takes on Mikaela Mayer. Looking forward to Saturday night, tomorrow night?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. It's always good to be here. People say it all the time, but it's true. It's a really great fight city. And Jonas, I think, it's interesting that she's been away for a while. Last time she was here, she became a unified champion. Now she's back as a two-weight world champion. And I think the absence will just make the Liverpool crowd embrace her that bit more. And this is still the gateway to future big things for her, because you look at that welterweight division and the belts are kind of spread around. There's potential for trying to look to become an undisputed champion, I think, in this division for her. And Mikaela Mayer will look at it exactly the same way. And they're two really good ambassadors for the sport, so they've been great all week. We were never going to get any beef out of these two. There was never going to be anything like that, but I just do expect it to be a really good fight. It's hard to see how it won't deliver us a good fight.
And is it even more interesting for someone like Mikaela, where she's coming up a lot in weight? You know, she's sort of most of her campaign's been at super featherweight. We know that she fought box, was a world champion there. So her coming up, 70, I suppose, quite a lot in weight, coming up to welterweight. It does sort of interesting on what her performance will be like.
Yeah, and you can't really know until you actually see her, because, as you say, she was at 130, then she stepped up and boxed at 135 against Lucy Wildheart, then 142 last time out, and now 147. And in a sense, you kind of wonder where it's going to end. But this is her maxing out. Welterweight she's not going to go above that, and she looks great. The only question would be is, with no head guard, with small gloves, can she hold a shot from Jonas, who I think is a big puncher, one of the bigger punchers in female pro boxing? And she'll say yes, obviously, but we don't really know until we see it. But she feels like this is definitely an advantageous move for her, that physically she's much stronger, she's not having to train on that horrendous calorie deficit and all of that kind of thing. So she's confident, but she knows she's got a big task ahead of her. But she's putting the pressure on herself, because, as she's been saying all week, if she doesn't win, then that closes some doors for her at the level she wants to be at. So I like the way she's gone about it. And her coach Al Mitchell, he's kind of talking up a war. I don't know whether that's a mental thing to try and get into Tasha's head a little bit, but he's been saying all week that that's what he thinks it'll be. That it'll be that dogfight where you get deep in it and it'll come down to who wants it more. But when you've got 2-minute rounds, it's kind of always going to be like that to an extent, because the pace is it's inevitably high.
And when it comes to someone like Natasha Jonas, it's no secret her age. Do you feel like it's a case of, as long as she keeps winning, she's going to keep fighting, or do you think that sort of the door may close, potentially sometime this year even?
I think as long as she keeps winning and keeps performing to a level that she's happy with, then she'll keep going. But I do think that in that division, Jessica McCaskill's got the WBC and the WBA, and as far as I understand it, she's maybe a free agent at the minute, or she's kind of fight by fight. So that could, if Tasha wins, then that fight can maybe get made. Sandy Ryan's got the WBO, she's the Matchroom. But I think at the minute, after a period where there was too much kind of internecine infighting in British boxing, I think with Eddie and Frank now working together on the Saudi cards and being forced to kind of get on and be nice to each other, I think the potential for collaboration now is better than it's been in the past. So Jonas, I think, will want to keep going, just as long as she feels like she's able to perform to the level that she finds acceptable. And we'll see on Saturday. We'll see on Saturday whether she's still there or not, but I believe that she will be.
Well, I suppose you did touch on it. You said about we see Eddie and Frank working together. We did see big news yesterday. Well, it sort of teased at the presser, and I suppose when His Excellency says something, it does end up happening. And yesterday we did see it signed, the 5 versus 5 of Eddie and Frank. Something a little bit different and something quite exciting, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. It's I can't really remember anything like that happening before. And when they said it at the press conference on Monday, we spoke to Eddie afterwards and Frank as well, and I kind of tried to get a sense of whether they knew about that or whether it had been sprung on them. I'm guessing they did know about it. And that will be a really interesting night. You know, it's something a little bit different. I think people will really engage with it. To an extent, it's quite UK focused, but it depends who's on the card. And I think that worldwide boxing fans will kind of buy into it because it's like a team thing. I've always thought in boxing there's room for a team thing, because in amateur boxing we had World Series boxing, which nobody ever really knew about, but it was brilliant. You had 5 fights and you got a result on the night, and it could be the start of a series. You know, they could get other promoters involved in it. They could say to Top Rank, listen, why don't you fight the winner? You know, they put a lot of thought behind all of this stuff because they want it to keep going for the long term. So that idea of promotional houses squaring off against each other, again, it's not something that's ever really happened in the past because there's too much politics involved. But if they could come in and essentially take that out of the sport at that level, then who knows where this could go. I mean, anybody's going to want to get involved in it, aren't they?
When it comes to the 5v5, I suppose it's a little bit putting you on the spot. What are some matchups that you do find intriguing when you initially hear it? You know, I say outside of AJ Fury being the obvious one, what are sort of matchups that you do find intriguing when you hear a 5 versus 5?
Oof. Yeah, that is a good question. I've not thought about this. So you might have to come back to me on that one.
Okay, yeah.
I need to give it a bit more thought.
Yeah, that's completely fine. I suppose that's absolutely fine. But also on another hand, and I think I've sort of briefly touched on it with you before, when it comes to, you know, all the big fights happening in Saudi, it leaves domestically a bit short. When we see something like this where they're predominantly you'd imagine, you know, Queensberry have a lot of UK fighters, Matchroom have a lot of UK fighters. I understand that they have a pool in America as well. But is there worry that, you know, with these fights, a 5v5 in England would be perfect? It's like, that'd be really ideal, but we're sort of, the value of domestic fights in the UK is getting sort of shorter because it's getting taken Saudi Arabia, as we see Mark Chamberlain versus Gavin Gwynn and fights like that. Are we losing out domestically?
Yeah, that's a good question, that, and it is something that I think boxing fans will be thinking about. It's something that I've been thinking about. I don't think there's going to be that many of these cards per year, and of course if you're a domestic fighter you want to get on these cards because of the profile and rewards that are available, and nobody would ever make any bones about that, and nobody would ever begrudge anybody a slot on these cards for that. You look at somebody like Gavin Gwynn, who you mentioned, who's worked hard to win that British title without any particular backing, and now, you know, that perseverance has paid off, and you love to see that. Because there's not going to be so many of these cards, I feel like it leaves domestic boxing in a healthy enough state, and in a way it could mean that promoters can concentrate a bit more on the domestic cards and the domestic matchups, because they know that top end at the moment is going to be taken care of by somebody else. The more promoters who get involved in this, the better. You know, it's Queensberry who started the whole thing off, and it's their enterprise on the UK front more than anybody else's. Everybody else is doing it in association with them, as I understand it. You know, when Frank kind of lists the promoters, it's Queensberry, then Seller, then Gold Star, then Matchroom at the minute, and that's essentially the order. And you need to pay attention to those things because they're important. You know, that being said in the right order, and I hope I did just say it in the right order. It's important. But, you know, Top Rank obviously co-promote Tyson Fury, and they've got a lot of good fighters, and they'll be thinking to themselves, okay, we don't want to dilute our domestic shows, but at the same time, we've got guys who will want to box on these cards. Jalolov's one of their guys, and he's on the Fury Usyk undercard, I think, isn't he? And promoters everywhere. You know, that's why when at the press conference the other day, that question was directed towards Turki Al-Sheikh about Oscar De La Hoya, you do feel like that's a kind of a foolish thing to say if you're a promoter of a major outfit, because you don't want to be standing on the platform waving goodbye to this train, do you? You don't want to be in that position.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose we'll talk about the press conference on Monday. Anthony Joshua sort of squared up against Ngannou. They sort of sized each other up. Sort of, what did you make of the press conference and going into the fight?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'd never met Ngannou before the end of October, going over to work on that one, and you do some background but you don't really get a sense of what somebody's about. I think he's a great addition. He's got a great story. He's got that big star kind of vibe about him. You know, he's impressive, isn't he? And we all know what he did in the ring, which kind of is intriguing all of us, is to see what he can do against Joshua. And I've seen some criticism of it. I've seen Lennox Lewis isn't particularly a fan of it, and you know, you're always going to listen to anything he says and give him his due respect. But at the same time, because people are now boxing regularly, firstly, Ngannou's performance against Fury sets him up as being a legitimate fight for anybody in the top 10. And secondly, this isn't really holding anything up. It was supposed to be Wilder, but Wilder lost, so they can't do that. So then it's a question of, well, what do we do? And the easy thing would have been for Joshua to think, okay, well, I'll just take March off. But he's not. And that's got to be a good thing, because after he's had that fight, Anthony will have boxed 4 times in quite comfortably less than 12 months.
I don't know when the last time he's done that.
Before he was the champion, basically. Before he was the champion. And that's where we are now, and that's how this is different, because making more than 2 fights a year for a world champion, particularly when he was a unified world champion, politically is very, very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do for broadcast network reasons and lots of other reasons. But now it seems possible. Look at Parker. Like, Parker's going to fight. You know, he's fighting every few weeks. It feels like.
Yeah, and definitely. And I suppose, you know, sticking on the topic of Saudi Arabia, won't say it too loud because we're in Liverpool. But last week we did see Artur Beterbiev, you know, put in a really, really destructive display against Callum Smith. Another thing, Turki Al Sheikh did say at the press conference, you know, we want to see Beterbiev versus Bivol. It's sort of one of them ones where you're either on one side, you're either on the other side, or you know, you're going to flip-flop in between. It's a real 50-50 fight between Beterbiev and Bivol. I suppose when we're trying to take recency bias out of that equation, how do you think a fight between Beterbiev and Bivol would go?
I mean, I make Beterbiev the favourite, just because when I've seen him, I've been more impressed by him than I have been by Bivol. That's quite a basic way to judge them, but I have been. Bivol is one of these guys, though. I think the better the opponent, the better he will be. He'll raise his game, but I just think that power that he's got, Beterbiev, is freakish, really. But again, you know, it's something we all want to see, and it's proven up until this point not to be capable of getting done. Nobody's been able to get it done, so I think they're looking at June or July. I think Beterbiev wants a bit more time after Ramadan than June, but again, that's another fight we're going to get, and like I say, it's one that they've had plenty of time to do it, and it hasn't proved possible.
Absolutely. Andy, just want to say thank you for taking time to speak to me. Really, really, always good to catch up with you, and really, really appreciate it. And yeah, enjoy the rest of Liverpool and enjoy tomorrow night, mate. Appreciate it. Thank you. Top man, thank you. Cheers.
We need to think of a new advert for freebets.com.
Get your best betting offers from freebets.com.
Yeah, that'll do.
The following deals are now live.